Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to episode number 77 of Circle of Fellows, the January 2022 edition, first one of the year. Welcome, everybody. We are here to talk about how to deliver communications that add value in your organization. Looking forward to this conversation, and I'll start off by introducing myself. I'm Shel Holtz. SCMP, ABC, IABC Fellow, and I will be the moderator of the panel today. We have four terrific guests who can speak quite articulately about this topic, and I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, starting with Priya.
Hello, everyone. I'm here. It's Priya Bates, president of Inner Strength Communication, based in Toronto, Canada, which is very cold right now. And I'm really excited to be here with you. I focus on internal communication, employee engagement, and change management. So I keep my conversation internal.
Great, Jim.
Jim Shaffer, Annapolis, Maryland. I lead my own firm that I have for the last 20 years. Prior to that, I was with Towers Perrin, and prior to that, I was with the press secretary to the governor of Kansas. I focus my attention now exclusively on leadership development, organizational improvement, financial improvement, and a whole host of issues related to leadership and people.
Terrific. Cindy, you're up next.
Hi, I'm Cindy Schmieg, SCMP and IABC Fellow. Currently, I'm an online instructor in graduate communication program with Southern New Hampshire University. And in that role, I use my past history of 30 years on the corporate side in global semiconductor industry and agency side, mostly in transportation. So I'm coming to you from Arizona, where it's warm and sunny.
And Stephanie, this is your first time on Circle of Fellows, so welcome. We're glad you're here.
Thank you very much, Shel. I do appreciate it. Good evening, everybody. Yes, I'm coming from a very sunny place as well, somewhere south of the equator from South Africa. I am a past chair of IABC. I am a fellow and an ABC. I have served on the Research Foundation Board and various committees, including the Accreditation Committee. And I'm a perennial gold quill evaluator, which I think is a huge learning experience. And I continue to learn from this. In my day job, I have been in private practice for over 30 years. I specialize in applied communication and behavioral research, as well as strategic communication and organizational development. I have been very privileged to consult to major public and private organizations, both in South Africa and very far north of our borders. Thank you very much for the invitation, and I look forward to the conversation with my fellows.
It should be a good one. And since we're talking about how communicators can add value, I have an obvious first question. Before I get to it, I do want to invite those of you watching in real time. I can see that there are people watching live. To ask questions, share your own experiences, observations, comments using the comment feature in YouTube. And I'll be able to put those right up on the screen and present them to our panel for their thoughts about it. We try to make this an interactive session. But that first question, since we're talking about communicating value, is what is value anyway? What are we talking about here? This is a question that resonates with me. Where I work, I'm senior director of communications at Webcor, which is a general contractor headquartered in San Francisco. Our vision statement is about doubling the value we bring to owners. And the question when the leadership came up with that is, okay, does that mean that we're going to cut the cost in half? What exactly does doubling the value mean? So when we talk about adding value to our clients and our organizations as communicators, what are we talking about?
Well, I think we're talking about a gain that's greater than the cost of creating the gain. Basically, the gain that you create needs to be something that adds to the financial or operating improvement of the organization, ultimately the price of the stock and that sort of thing. But when I'm working with communication people, what I'm interested in is, did you create something that was greater for your organization than the cost of creating that? That is value from that perspective.
And I'd agree with Jim that I've always said that internal communication is an integral enabler of business success. And the conversations I'm having with internal communication professionals and HR professionals around the world is how do we connect what we do with the results from a business perspective that matter to the organization. So I've talked about connecting it to retention, recruitment, risk, reputation, and results, and making that connection in a way that's really real for your organization and your leaders.
In line with that is like that ROI, or the return on investment approach, is important, but I think it needs to start with the business need, just as a Gold Quill Award does, and that is based on the strategic direction of an organization. And it goes back to what you said, Shel, the vision of the organization and the plans that you make for communication and the results that you measure for communication should fall out of that.
Interesting. So when you put forward this topic to me, I remember the think tank, the Research Foundation think tank that I took part in, an IABC think tank. I think it was in Chicago some 20 years ago, when we had a look at what members wanted, what we needed to be doing. A survey went out. And one of the biggest questions was, how do we demonstrate return on investment? Okay, that was 20 years ago. Okay, I think we're still answering that question. We're still asking that question. What everybody came up with, there's no silver bullet, is there? Unless we measure in terms of behavioral competencies, in terms of other factors. And those factors have changed quite considerably over the last 2 years with the landscape that we're dealing with now. What is value? And what do organizations define as value when we have a fluid workforce? Very interesting questions. I don't think we're closer to getting that silver bullet in terms of measurement. Certainly, there are certain dimensions and indices that we can measure. But to demonstrate clear return on investment, are we there yet? This is a question I'm asking my fellow panelists.
Well, yeah, and that leads me to ask the question, is communications able to deliver real ROI? Because real ROI is a very clearly defined accounting measure. It's a math formula. It's not what Jim said, which is that you generated something that produced value that was greater than what it cost to create it. But that's not the calculation that determines ROI. Can communicators deliver, financial, what the chief accounting people talk about when they talk about ROI?
Well, I agree with you. That's exactly where I've been with the kind of organizations that I've worked with. I'm just sitting here looking at a couple of the clients I've worked with. For instance, I'll give you an example. FedEx, Fred Smith has become a very good client of mine down in Tennessee. But FedEx, a project that we did with them, got freight claims down 23%, truck accidents down 54%, revenue increases up 23%, and $6.1 million in return on investment, and on one organization, and then 5 others at 1,700% return. Fred had no doubt that was value added.
By the way, that formula, just to share, is the return, the benefit that was produced by the effort, divided by the investment. That's the ROI. And I think, some of what communicators do, you can assign a value to it. Some of it a little more amorphous, don't you think?
Absolutely. And I think the one thing, I guess, it's the little bit of the scientist in me, having the science and research background coming into communication always helped me approach things differently. So when I talk to communication professionals, internal communication is still very undervalued and under-resourced. One of the opportunities is to compare having communication support and not having it. There's a lot of scenarios where you can make that happen in your organizations. And that's something that I always used when I was in-house in corporations, and then now as a consultant as well, to be able to say, here's the effort we put against this project, and here's the difference it made compared to these other projects that didn't actually get the awareness, understanding, and response that were needed.
I think what you said, sorry, Cindy, after you.
Oh, I've done a lot of merger and acquisition communication in my time, and working with other business leaders in the organizations and the operations side, I found that you can value the productivity benefits from communication, because in a merger or an acquisition, you're trying to keep productivity the same, increase it. And working with operations people, I found that I could take measurements from the past and compare them to what they are in that right after the merger and acquisition, and see that we were able to actually retain the productivity.
Yeah,
I think one of the places where it really starts is, and this is something that we do with our clients, is oftentimes we start with a value proposition, and that is we step back and we say, okay, what is it that we will do and what we won't do? And I'll give you an example of what Teresa Paulson at Owens Corning said. And I helped her with her CEO develop this value proposition. It's very simple. Our work will help the company make money or save money. If it doesn't save or make money, we won't do that work.
Stephanie, you were...
Yes, I was, Shel. From what I'm hearing is we're defining value in primarily behavioral terms. And an interesting case study that I was involved with was with a major banking group, where we were trying to actually reduce staff pilfering and actual theft, which we managed to reduce by 33% with a communication program. So I guess what we're trying to say here is, and again, we need to define what that value means to the leaders of the organization before we start with our programs.
And I think the one thing we can't underestimate, and something I do a lot, is when I do my job right and when internal communications does its job right, sometimes nothing happens. And being able to call that out right up front, that we're there to limit disruption and keep people focused when there is disruption and transformation and change going on, i.e. the last 2 years.
Yeah, Priya, you earlier mentioned as one possible dimension of value retention. And right now, we're going through this great resignation. So leaders are focused on retention, and that is easy to measure, right? We know what it costs to onboard a new employee, for example, and to calculate that value in terms of dollars is easy. On the other hand, one of the things that I'm engaged in right now where I work is a lot of manager development, helping managers be better communicators, helping them be coaches and mentors instead of traditional bosses. I think that's a little harder to translate into dollar value, but you can certainly see the effect in improved engagement among employees. You can probably correlate an improvement in productivity, but I don't see that fitting neatly into that ROI formula. So Jim, when you talk about it must either make money or save money, how would something like helping managers be better communicators fit into that particular rubric?
Well, presumably you've got managers who are better communicators who are identifying where the communication breakdowns are creating underperformance, and then those people dive in there and start remanaging communication or getting rid of the communication breakdowns so that the performance goes up. That's pretty simple stuff, frankly. I think we're getting, sometimes we and a lot of other people get think that there's one definition for value, but there's a lot of definitions that are numbers oriented, and there's some that are emotionally oriented, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that in the end, if we're spending money that is creating gains one way or another, and it is effective and efficient and consistent with where we want to go, then we can pretty well assume we are adding some degree of value. What's frustrating is with a number of the more traditional communication people is they go in and they start distributing stuff and they send stuff out and let's get some more stuff out. But I don't see many times where we're getting anything back. So I don't think we need to define and redefine something according to Webster. I think what we need to do is help our communication people get the kind of gains that we've been helping them get, whether it's for productivity or return on investment or whatever. And sometimes it's going to be big and sometimes it's going to be little. So I wouldn't parse it so much as to say, did what we did today create a gain that's better than what we had before, and that the cost of getting it wasn't $100,000 to get $5,000 back. There's a little bit of education that has to go with our communication practitioners about that.
And that speaks to one of the points that Cindy made in our conversation by email. And I'm frustrated when I see a lot of communicators, and Stephanie, you mentioned Gold Quill. I'm actually a co-host of one of the Blue Ribbon panels this year. And over the years, I still see entries come in that talk about what they did in terms of their outputs, but not the outcomes. They printed this many things, they created this many videos, whatever it may be. These can be useful measures for us as communicators to know what we did that led to the outcome. But I don't think any senior executive loses any sleep at night because not enough emails went out.
Hey, boss, I just spent a whole lot more money. See you tomorrow morning.
Well, that's true. But the thing about that is when Jim was talking, I was thinking about the way that the reports go up to the CEO or the senior leadership team is all based on what they want. So you need to fit your measurement to what they want and they expect. And different CEOs value different things. I really have a CEO who would have wanted to know about the likes and the shares and the hits. But those are the minor points. And what they really need to hear is the business results. But those outputs and outtakes I consider as like the bottom rung of the measurement ladder that leads to the business success. And without understanding those, you can't get to the business success and you can't measure it. So there needs to be, all of it needs to be included, even if those outtakes are just a footnote in the report that you do.
Oh yeah, I don't mind seeing them reported. I just mind seeing them reported as the only measure of success.
Yeah. I have an example of, in most of my work is focused on external in marketing communication, and my teaching is mostly focused on that. And the Cannes organization, which we know for film festivals, also has a marketing side, and they have developed this ladder of marketing success based on long-term value. And like the first rung of the ladder is, did it meet the campaign objectives? And then the top level is, did the brand sustain long-term benefit? So they have all these steps in between. And I think that's the approach that I take. And what I teach my students is you have to measure both, because as a communicator, you need those bottom level outtake measurements to improve your work. But your CEO doesn't want to hear about all that. They want to hear about how you help the organization.
And it's really about the change in mindset from a communication perspective of, a lot of them focus on volume. They value volume more than they do actual impact. And that's the challenge, that they think that the secret of their success, their secret sauce, is creating stuff and making it look pretty, right? And that's when we get things go wrong, because they feel that if they do less, they'll actually be worthless. And I have seen the exact opposite, that there's this opportunity to do less and have more impact at the end of the day by focusing on the right things. The stuff that Jim, you were talking about it. Let's choose what we're not going to do. Let's prioritize and let's reduce the noise, because we're actually, when we create volume that doesn't matter, that we're teaching our audiences to ignore us and shut us off.
Priya, I completely agree with you. One of the things that I found early on in this process, maybe 20 years ago or whatever, is that historically, everything I agree with all of you. What you're saying is about doing more, doing less, adding value, and all that stuff. But I think oftentimes what we found out is the first project I did with this was at Owens Corning, and what we did is we created a very, very stepwise process to look at everything that we do. And the steps are these. where are the best, now listen to the question here, where are the best opportunities to improve performance by better managing communication, not where are the best opportunities to improve communication. So step one is identify where are the best opportunities to improve performance by better managing communication. 2, what's the size of the opportunity, the upside opportunity? 3, what are the root causes of the underperformance? 4, what will it cost to improve? 5, is the ROI acceptable? Every time, and I've probably done 20, 25 projects like this in various different industries, every time they've gone through that stepwise process, they've done exactly what they should do to say, look, where are the opportunities? What's the size of the opportunity? What's the root cause? What will it cost us to improve? Is the ROI acceptable? In every situation like that, they have added value, considerable value, whether it's productivity or savings or freight claims down or truck accidents down or whatever it might be. All those measures came about through that stepwise process.
Is it incumbent upon us as communicators to counsel leaders when the value they think is important really isn't, that they should be emphasizing something different that will have a more significant impact on the organization?
Well, I think that's important to have that conversation. Absolutely. I've had interviews with CEOs that they were thinking in the old way. They were thinking in the old, today's communication way. And that is, well, I really think we ought to, I'm thinking Roger Dupree and I know all of you know of him. I know Shel and I he's a very dear friend of mine, and Shel has known him for years as well. And I remember sitting in a meeting room with the CEO of a company in Indiana, and he came in after Roger and I had walked around, looked at all his books to see what he was like and all that stuff. And he came in, he sat down, and he said, "Okay, what I want to do is help improve communication, and here's where I want him to start." And then he started rattling off all this traditional stuff. We need more newsletters, and we need to do a video of me. The president wanted a video of him, God forbid, and lots of other stuff. And Roger and I had to very, very nicely say, time out. Are you aware of what's going on in other companies where the communication people are actually working with the CEOs like yourself to identify where the best places where, if we improve communication, would we get an up boost of some kind? I've never heard of that sort of thing. I didn't know they could do that. Oh, yes. Let me show you those companies who've done that. Can I have one of those? He said, as Roger and I started to go out, and we came back and we did. And we worked with him and his communication people, and we got a significant improvement in productivity out of a particular piece of the organization. If I say who the piece is, you're going to know immediately because they're one of the only 2 or 3 companies in the world who do what we were doing.
Stephanie, I wonder also, Jim was talking about telling a CEO that maybe we don't need a video of you. What about the CEO who expects the communicators to do the CEO's job? Do we counsel the CEO that it's time for you to step forward and be the somebody once told me that CEO should stand for employees, owners, and customers, employees, and owners, because that's your audience. You're selling the company and telling the company story to those audiences. And a lot of CEOs, it seems, are abdicating some of that communication to the people who produce the communication stuff.
So I'm glad you asked me that question, because this is something I feel very strongly about. I think it's not counseling the CEO. I think it's educating the CEO. And not just educating the CEO, but educating the leadership team as a whole in communication, its impacts on organizational behavior, and what role they should actually be playing. Once you've done this, and Jim was saying he's doing a lot of leadership development in this area. Once you've done this, you've got a very fertile field where these guys will assume responsibility, co-responsibility for organizational communication, cooperate, and you will achieve the gains that you're looking for at the end of the day.
I think the other thing that we need to keep in mind as well is that with big, large, complex organizations, we do need to help CEOs communicate, right? So I think there's this whole conversation around that it's wrong for communication professionals and executive comms folks to help. we can absolutely help ensuring that that CEO is very involved in the process, that we know what's important to them. You know, I remember when I worked at HP, one of the leaders just was like, they're busy. Their job is running the company and running large, complex teams. In companies I worked for, it was 160,000 people, and you know, billions of dollars of product, like dollars of revenue that were coming in. So they have things that they need to focus on. But I remember this one project where what they started doing is asking the leader, it was a VP at the time, to simply leave a voicemail message once a week to say how your week went. So you still captured their voice, you help them tell their stories. In some cases, those communication professionals who work really closely with them to observe and capture those conversations. So there's still a way that we need to be there to help to make those CEOs' jobs easier and create that connection that ultimately you want from employees.
Sometimes the tactics do matter. Right. I mean, that's one of the reasons we're there, is to make sure that we're employing the correct tactic that's going to produce the outcome we're looking for. I remember working with a CEO who wanted to get a message out to managers in the company and asked to have an email sent. And I had just gotten back from the IABC conference where Soledad O'Brien had spoken. And I just shamelessly appropriated an idea she had thrown out during her keynote, and said, look, I got a better idea. Why don't we gather up all of the managers who are available here in the building? We'll pull them into the lunchroom. You can tell them what you want them to know. We'll videotape that. We'll stream it live for those who are able to watch in real time. The rest can watch the video, but that way they get to look in your eyes and hear your voice and understand that you're serious about this. This is not just another email from the CEO. And it worked so well, they gave it a label. And whenever he had anything serious he wanted to share, that's how he did it, face to face with live people in the room who could ask questions and react in real time. So it seems to me that we talk about outcomes, but you produce those outcomes by employing the right tactics. Agree? Disagree?
I completely agree. I get so excited when I hear you talk like that, because I was just thinking when you got into there about another project that I did up in Indiana. I started to say Roger was there, but Roger was not there. But anyway, it was in Indiana, and the woman who headed this distribution center, which is also known as a warehouse, it's a fancy name for it, but she was complaining very hardly to me and to Bob Kula, I mentioned earlier, who is now with Kiewit Organization. We were overworking with her, and she was very frustrated over the fact that they were pushing productivity really hard. We really got to get the stuff in the trucks, et cetera, et cetera. But the problem is that there was huge amounts of damage. The ladders would fall down and the product would fall on the floor, and they'd try to get them into the trucks, and they'd slam them into the trucks fast and that sort of thing. And on the way to meet with her that morning, after Bob and I had spent the night at a nearby hotel, on the way in, he said, "What do you think?" He says, I have an idea about something that's not working, and I want to do a test with her. So we sat down and we talked about this, and she said, and I said to her, let me just ask you a real quick question. How is your compensation spread out in the organization in terms of weightedness? And she asked me what that meant, and I explained what it meant. She said, "I'll have to go back and look, and I'll be right back to you." About 15 minutes, and Bob and I sat there, and he says, "You know what the answer is, don't you?" "Well, I've had it a few times." Yeah. So she came back and she said, "I am embarrassed to say this, but we've got all this productivity and we've got all this damage. And when you ask me about that, the weighting, here's what it is: 50% for productivity, 30% safety, 20% quality." I didn't say a word. And she said, "I think we need to change the reward system. Do you?" And I said, "Yes. That's one of the most powerful communication devices you have in this organization." And so I think when, Shel, you mentioned something about different kinds of things that you apply. the traditional communication people think videos and written stuff and newsletters and things like that, and oftentimes don't think that reward system is communicating powerfully in the organization. So it's not just necessarily what you say, but it's also what you do, how you behave, and what you're communicating as a leader. So I think it's really important for communication people to realize that it's much, much more than the traditional communication stuff. Reward systems communicate.
I would add recognition to that as well.
Recognition, absolutely.
Systems also
absolutely. Yes.
communicate very powerfully.
Yes. Celebrations, high fives. Yes.
Yeah, and that's been really interesting in the DEI debate, like in the conversations around diversity, equity, inclusion, in any of those communication and engagement plans we've put together. It really is looking at those operational and root causes. It's not about just throwing out a training out there so that we can check boxes. It's really looking at your systems and what's actually happening in those interactions that's going to actually drive the outcome. So it's a different lens that you look at. You recognize that it's not just a communication. It's usually not a communication problem. It's something that's more inherent and that you need to actually dig a little bit and have the conversations and do the research to identify what those are. And that's a big value we can add.
Absolutely.
I think you really are singing to my hymn book in that, and again, I'm going to bring up a process that we go and we diagnose, we assess. And what we diagnose and assess could include what do the employees see as a reward? What are the issues? What are the problems? Once we've got a proper research and a proper assessment down on the table, then only can we plan, implement, and measure whether it's working or not. So it's going back to a proper process from start to finish, commencing with very sound research. And that research could be formal or informal. It could be as simple as asking the leaders, what do you see as value? But again, we need to focus on the process, and we need to focus on very strong diagnostic skills before we even start.
Before we continue, I do want to remind those who are watching in real time or may have joined late that you are able to participate in this conversation. Just use the comment field in YouTube to ask a question, share an observation, tell a story. I will present it on the screen, and the panel will react to it. So that is available to you, but we can continue on while we're waiting for a question or a comment. It's interesting. Well, I think that's a typo that somebody shared, but we'll press on.
Don't tell us what it said if it's bad.
Well, it's not bad. It just doesn't make any sense, as you can see. I think it's a little bit of spam there, maybe, to get us to a website. In any case, adding value, it seems to me, requires you knowing what is valued by the leaders. And I think a lot of times communicators don't ask that question. I'll share a story, if I may. This goes back to my consulting days. This was a large, well-known teaching hospital where the communication budget was created by contributions from multiple schools within the university. And every dean felt they owned the communication function because they contributed to it. And so the members of the communication team were 100% responding to out of the blue requests from each of the schools. They were always fighting fires. When we, doing the audit, met with the president and the CEO, and by the way, I should tell you that we were told, whatever the outcome of this audit is, we can't add staff. There's a hiring freeze. We said, okay. We interviewed the president and the CEO, and we said, what do you expect from communications? And they said, well, we are no longer just one hospital. We are now a network. We have acquired multiple hospitals and clinics and labs and other facilities, and we really need employees to understand that this is not a single hospital anymore. We're part of this broader network, and information sharing and collaboration needs to take on a new approach, a new dimension. And when we presented the results of the audit and said, look, basically, because of the funding structure of the department, all they're able to do is respond to requests. They don't have the time to be strategic and help people understand their role in this changed organization. They decided that they were going to fund additional headcount in order to help them achieve their strategic goal. I mean, sometimes you just have to point out what seems obvious, but why is it, do you think, that some communicators don't do that? And what mindset should they adopt in order to get to that level of information that can help them understand what their primary role really needs to be?
I think a lot of people are afraid of accountability. I hate to say it that way, but it's been a bit of a reality to come to communication because they love the art. I always say they love the creation. They love the creativity. They love putting out a lot of stuff that they're really proud of, but they're not necessarily into the science, which is the business part of it, the really thinking about what does the business result look like. And some of them are afraid to have the conversations. They don't have access to the CEOs and don't know quite how to get there. So we've been having these conversations for years about getting a seat at the table. You know, it's getting a little old, and we just need to step forward and do the work and be part of the processes and programs that we know are possible. But I think that when I talk to a lot of communication professionals, some of them, quite a few, want to stay where they are. But what I'm seeing is a real difference in focus from younger communication professionals who really understand the results, the impacts. They're learning problem solving. That's kind of the basis of education right now. So I'm seeing that there's a step change, but those young communicators who want to make a difference are seeing resistance from some that are stuck in their ways.
Yeah, you know, human resources went through this about 20 years ago. They were seen as the people who just did the scut work, and they did this, get this thing out. And
very transactional.
Very, extremely transactional, and they just did stuff, you know. And then all of a sudden, there were a couple of articles written about the importance of the HR function starting to add value. And that really started moving about 15 years ago, and with the support of a couple of very, very senior folks at that time, a book was published about it. And HR has really, really shifted in most organizations from were the people who, you know, put out the newsletters and stuff like that. And now what we're doing is we're counseling our leadership team about human resources and how to manage that in order to implement our strategies. And so strategy is real. Strategy is things you do to make it work. We have communication people who are still talking about communication, strategic communication that has nothing to do with executing the business strategy. They just call it that. So I think one of the things that we need to be doing is helping our communication people understand that there are opportunities out there. There are people who are doing the kind of successes, you know, I can hold this up. So if you like 20 or 30 people who are doing that kinds of things, what can we do to communicate to more people who are not doing it, what other people can do, and then offer the support and the help so that they can get there? Because I think if they're going to look at their old way and they look at what the new people are doing, they're going to say, I can't do that. Well, most of the old people, most of the people who I've had the successes with, they couldn't do it either at one time, but they finally learned how to do it. And they're superstars in their organizations. It's doable.
We do have a couple of comments from one of our fellows, Amanda Hamilton Atwell. First, Priya, I so agree with you. So many communication professionals are reluctant to stand up and count their impact. But she also shared this. We know that communication professionals had a field day during the pandemic and communicating about it. I'm interested in knowing if anyone measured the impact of our efforts on the business.
It's a good question. From the conversations and again, I'll focus on internal communication. We saw a huge increase in the value, you know, that internal communication mattered, and we're seeing organizations invest. Here in Canada, we're seeing jobs come up again and again. The internal communication community is moving jobs because they're getting raises and they're getting higher positions. So that's exciting news. But we also heard that those same communication professionals are burnt out. They were putting in 60, 80 hours a week. They were very, very reactive. They weren't necessarily doing the strategic work and creating those connections. So they were, in some cases, I think that they're moving in order to set the new guardrails on not having to work so as hard as they have been. So I am very excited about somewhere people think that there's a value for internal communication because of the pandemic, but we need to get our internal communication folks doing the right work in order to have the impact on the business strategy. I'm not convinced that most of them are doing that.
I do think it's. Oh, go ahead, please.
Sorry. Could I just go back to Priya's comment earlier, prior to Amanda's question? How much of the communicator's understanding or stepping up to the plate starts at a foundational level in terms of the curriculum or what they are educated in? I'm putting that question out there to my colleagues.
It's a good question, Stephanie. Well, Cindy, you go ahead.
Well, as someone who is in the academic field now, I know that many of my students aren't getting that information that you have to deliver business results and that you have to be strategic. They're learning about how to do all the tactical efforts. So I really focus on that. But Priya made a different comment about how she sees younger people more result oriented. And so I'm not really sure of the state of academics and what people are learning globally, but it is an important part. And as practitioners, we can, make sure that more people know what's going on and how it's important that we be strategic. Frankly, back to the discussion before, it's how do we know what adds value? And if you're not starting from the organization's business plan and strategic direction, you're at the wrong place. I mean, everybody that does communication should have an understanding of what that plan is and then report and do their planning based on it.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to communicate a strategy if you don't have a strategy, if you don't know it. It's pretty unfair. That's pretty unfair, I think. I remember I was just thinking about back in my early days when I was Bob Docking's press secretary. He was the governor of Kansas, first, third, and first fourth-term governor. And I was a neophyte. I mean, I was just coming out of college. I was 18 or 19 years old or something like that. And I remember the first X number of months, I'm sitting there writing news releases and putting together speeches for him and doing stuff like that. And then I started realizing that there was a lot more that I could be doing to actually have an influence on his reelection. So I shifted from informing people to using information to take an action. And in this case, it was, we want him reelected. He never went below a 76% job approval. So this is what we were dealing with. But it wasn't just because we were doing stuff. It was because we were doing something that mattered to the state of Kansas and to him and to the rest of us who were employees.
Yeah, from the COVID perspective, I know that my focus in approaching that where I work was on business continuity. That if we did not pay attention to the protocols, I work for a construction company, and if your superintendents and foremen get sick, the project comes to a halt. You have to shut it down if you don't have the people who are needed on the project site to get the building built. So, this was not some abstract thing. We weren't just issuing the latest CDC guidance. We were trying to get people to understand and act based on the need to ensure that we could continue getting these projects built. So, there is a strategic way to approach something like COVID that comes up. And as Priya, as you said, it certainly has elevated the profile of communicators in a lot of organizations whose work maybe wasn't appreciated as much before. I've heard that from a lot of people. A couple of comments have come in. First one, this one, I hope I'm going to pronounce his name correctly, and I'm doing this for the audio podcast, but you can't see the comment on the screen. Mirko Petricevic, I hope I got that right, Says, thanks for these Circle of Fellows sessions. I've been listening to episodes focusing on measurement, and I'm applying some of the principles and tips to my post-secondary setting. Stay tuned regarding results. Absolutely will, and we do look forward to hearing about those, Mirko.
Mirko, good for you. That's an important thing you just said there.
Also, our fellow, Alice Brink, has to say the obvious. IABC has been my path from order taker to strategist. Anyone struggling with that transition needs to take advantage of professional development resources IABC offers. Anybody want to disagree with that?
No.
It's true. I'd say the same thing. But what's amazing to me, Shel, is how many are new to the field. So the people who are being hired into roles because organizations have seen the value and the need for for communication during the pandemic have also been hiring the HR person or the admin. Like when I do a conference, the number of people who put their hands up saying, I've never done communication before. I've never belonged to an association. I've not been trained in the basics, but I like to write and they gave me this job. And I don't know if the rest of you, if you're hearing or seeing the same thing, I'm amazed at that. I was not expecting it.
By the way, I was
don't-
close, just so you know.
I don't know the beach.
Petricia
The beach. Okay, I like that. I'm wondering, and I don't have the answer to this, but I'm guessing that there's an issue here. I'm wondering if when these kids are getting out of school and they're going to journalism, I have a dual degree, journalism and political science. Other people have communication degrees of various different kinds. But how many teachers today, the professors, are teaching the kinds of things that we want them to be teaching based on our conversation today versus do they see communication as the traditional way? I don't know the answer to that. I'm wondering if anybody does.
Cindy, you work in academia, right? I mean, my understanding is that getting a change to the curriculum is like passing an act of Congress.
Oh my God. It definitely is. Yes. The school I teach in is all online, and the development process for new classes is quite difficult, involves a lot of people because of the online aspect. And I act as a subject matter expert trying to set up the content for these classes. But I also work a little bit with the University of Minnesota's communication program in a conference that IABC Minnesota supports. And they have professors on board with real life experience in the field. So that's the way that they manage getting the content delivered that is true to the field. But in the most part, I think most universities rely on research professors to prepare the content for the classes. So it's not necessarily the practical application of communication in the world, which makes associations like IABC even more important so that the people can get that practical experience.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you, Cindy. I didn't know the answer, but that doesn't surprise me that we're the folks that we have there and their exposure to what we're talking about today.
Earlier, we were talking about reward and recognition as two processes, two mechanisms in organizations that communicate tremendously. There are others that are outside of the control or the jurisdiction of a communication function. We may not even be aware of them because they're processes that don't touch us, but they are integral to the operation of the organization. How would we learn about those in order to be able to provide the kind of counsel to the leaders of those organizations that those processes need to change in order to close the say-do gap?
I think the place I would start would be with the customers. A lot of the work that I've done over the years has been to go out and get input from customers of the organization. And I've taken communication people with me. I remember working in one company, it was a flour company, and the communication person and I was in Chicago, got in the back of the truck, and the whole thing was full of flour. And that was back in the days when we were wearing navy blue suits and gray suits and stuff. And we both got out of the truck, went into the place. We were having to shake ourselves off. But it just reminded me, though, of that a lot of what I've done over the years with communication people is I've taken them with me out to meet with not only the people in the manufacturing floor and the people in the offices, but let's go talk to some customers. Let's find out what they think of us and what do they know or not know, and what would they like to do to have a better relationship with us. I've gotten an immense amount of information that enabled me to bring back inside the organization things that we need to be doing differently in order to meet the needs of our customers, the people who are buying our products and services and contributing to our welfare.
And when I worked in-house, I'd encourage my teams to do exactly the same thing, Jim. You know, go out with the truck drivers and spend a day, as long as we got sign-offs from the unions. You know, go to the shop floors and go to the stores and be a customer and figure out what that experience is like. You know, we are all shareholders and we're all customers as well. And now you can also find out a lot of information online. There's Glassdoor. There's all these sites where people, like my kids, will rate my teacher or rate my doctor. Yeah, there is so much information out there. You have to, you know, have some balance with what you're reading, but it does provide you with inputs in order to really understand what the key issues are from a business perspective.
Yeah, Priya, I agree. Kristen Kelly and I went into about 5 different Owens Corning plants, and every time we went there, I remember the first time we did it was up in upstate New York, and we went out on the floor, and she says, "What are we going to be talking about?" And I said, "We're not going to be talking about anything. We're going to be listening, asking questions." And it was absolutely amazing that we'd go out on the floor and we'd start hearing things from people. And then we'd get people over a period of time involved in the process. And when you're involved in the process, you have ownership in it. When you have ownership in it, you're going to make it a success. And that's something that she learned in that process. And then we took that to about, I think, 5 or 6 other plants in the United States. But I think that the important thing that you just said, Priya, a second ago there is get out on the floor. If you can't have access to the CEO, you have access to the person who's doing the widgets every day and can probably tell you how to do those widgets better.
I couldn't agree more about the importance of getting out to where the employees are and talking to them. Doing the annual engagement survey is important, but inadequate all by itself. I know every time I go out onto a project site, I learn something about what's standing in the way of better productivity or higher levels of engagement or improved employee experience. Isn't it also important, and I'm going to throw this one to you, Stephanie, because it gets back to that issue of the leader's role as a communicator, isn't it important for them to get out into the field? I know I struggle with this, getting our leaders out into the field, and yet I remember I was out on one project where I said, "How's it going?" And one of the project engineers, that's the entry-level position on a project from the salary side, as opposed to the craft side. He said, "Oh, it was great. So-and-so was out here yesterday. I saw him in person," like he was, you know, Mick Jagger or you know, or somebody. But that leader was a little embarrassed and surprised that he was that important. His presence was that important. Stephanie, isn't it important that leaders get out and spend time with the people and hear from them directly?
I certainly think it is, Shel. But if they don't or they won't, you need to get that opinion back to them in terms of your own diagnostic phase. And yeah, they do understand numbers. You mentioned the employee engagement survey. There are other methods of doing that. But there's nothing that beats the leader shaking an employee's hand. That's your desired scenario. Whether you're going to get it right or not, who knows? But that opinion does need to filter up the line so that they can act on it.
I'm going to tell you a story that is an important one, I think, from the perspective of the role that we can play. I had an example. It was at Purdue Processing, poultry processing company in Salisbury, Maryland, which is not far from here. And I was doing a project for them. And I had talked about the importance to the leadership team that they get out and they talk with the people, they listen to the people, et cetera, et cetera. And so the guy comes back one day into the office to me. He says, "Where's Jim? I want to talk to Jim and tell him what I just did." So he comes up to me and he said, "I've been out there and I've talked to 2,400 people a day." I said, you've got 4,000 people there. You talk to 2,100 people in this period of time. He says, "Yeah." He says, "Here's what I do." And he pulls out his stopwatch and he says, "I turn it on." And I say, "You got 2 minutes. How's things going?" I think you did what? Okay. Jim's coaching model came into play here. So the message here is teach them how to do it right.
Exactly. Exactly.
Priya, just because it was based on something you said, Amanda's going back to the observation you made. It's so true. The good secretary getting the communication job, happening less, but still happens.
And I'd argue it's starting to happen more because of the lack of resources out there.
That's true. As people are leaving organizations and the organizations are finding it difficult to bring new talent on board, they use the tools they've got, even though those may not be optimal.
So anecdotally, I served on our country standards generating body, where we develop unit standards for the profession. And we started off by doing a survey amongst most of the communication professionals in the country to find out what their entry level was to communication. I mean, some of the findings were shocking. We had actors, we had teachers, we had even had lawyers who were now professional communicators. And I think this is interesting. It's something that we need to have a look at, and we need to be considering this when we look at the educational opportunities that we do have, or the in-house mentoring, or the further professional development of the people doing these jobs. Just an observation.
Mm-hmm. I know that, I'm sorry, Cindy? Cindy, you're muted.
You're muted.
I got you.
Communication for the non-communicators.
Say again?
Communication for the non-communicators.
Sort of like finance for non-financial people.
Yeah.
Again, generationally, when I look at what my kids who are 17 and 19 can do instinctively, you know, in terms of writing, expressing themselves, editing, like it, I'm really excited. So for me, it's not, yes, we don't have professionally trained communication communicators out there, but the opportunity to get them focused right is really great. Like it's really in front of us, and I'm expecting great things because I think there's a lot of intuitive knowledge that the new generations bring.
Right. And Mirko says, thanks again, folks. IABC learning opportunities are crucial business development for those of us who are one-person teams. And boy, I couldn't agree more with that. And that does take us to about 2 minutes left. Before we wrap up, I do want to let everyone know about the next episode of Circle of Fellows. After I share Alice's comment, more and more of what we as communicators need to do is help others communicate effectively. I think that's half of my job. Honestly, if my role is internal communications, that means I have to improve the organization's internal communications, not just what we're producing, but how individuals communicate with each other, how leaders communicate with the organization, and how teams collaborate with each other and share information. With construction projects, they exist in isolation. They're almost like little businesses all by themselves. And if one of them solves a problem, that's great for that project. But how do they share that solution with other projects that may encounter it so that that solution is at hand and something that they can take advantage of? We need to create those channels and processes that help information and knowledge flow through the organization. I do want to share that the next Circle of Fellows is scheduled for Thursday, February 17th And that will be an hour earlier than usual. It will be at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. I believe that is in order to accommodate the participation of Rajiv Kumar, who will be joining us from India. And I believe that'll be a challenge at any normal hour that most of us in North America and even Europe would be able to take advantage of. Also joining us will be Alice Brink, who participated in our conversation today. Diane Gajewski, another academic. It's always nice to have the academic perspective here. And Jane Mitchell. So that should be a great conversation on communication for the new business focus on ESG, something we really didn't get into today. But communicating around environmental, social, and governance, that is a new priority and absolutely a way the communicators can add value. I want to thank the members of the panel. It's been a terrific conversation. Also, as ever, a shout out to Anna Willey, whose behind the scenes coordination make all of this possible. These panels wouldn't happen without Anna's yeoman-like work. So a great thank you to Anna, and we'll see you next month. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you,
sir.
Shel.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.